Test 1 2 1 2.
3 4. Ah, shit! I counted to 3.
Hey, it's Geoff Keighley, and you may or may not know me from my writing and TV work about video games. Welcome to an experiment that you are now a willing participant in. If I was making software, I'd call this an alpha version, or if I was making a play, this would be a workshop. So what is this? Well, it's a chance for me to scratch an itch I've had for a while. I miss having great, in-depth conversations with people who are shaping the technology and video game industries and sharing those with the public. So much of what we read is reduced down to just sound bites now, and sometimes I think the personalities of the folks being interviewed never get to be shown. So I thought I'd start recording some conversations I have with interesting people in the video game world. And the first subjects are Gabe Newell and Erik Johnson from one of the great video game companies out there, Valve. Now, there's no advertising in this test episode. I'm putting this out there to see if people think something like this has value. And if it does, maybe you'll drop me a line on Twitter at Geoff Keighley, or drop a little donation to support future podcasts at podcast.gameslice.com. I'm hoping to make this a series, so please subscribe on iTunes or the RSS feed, and I will keep you posted on where this experiment goes. And now, on with the show. I first met Gabe Newell when I was a teenager in 1997. I was writing a story about the company he co-founded named Valve that was working on a first-person action game for PCs named Half-Life. I remember going to sushi lunch with him and being embarrassed that I didn't really know how to use chopsticks. Over the past 2 decades, I've spent time chronicling the key moments in Valve's history in my Final Hours apps and stories. So here's where the plug goes. You can download my latest story about Valve, The Final Hours of Portal 2 from 2011, on Steam and iPad. Anyway, a few weeks ago, I felt like one of those pivotal moments was about to happen. The team had invited me in for a first look at what they were going to show at the Game Developers Conference, or GDC. I thought I was going to see the Steam machines, Valve's new array of PCs that connect to your TV. What I saw was a lot more. I got my first inkling that something was up when I got an email at 8:16 a.m. from Eric Wolpaw, a friend of mine who's probably best known as one of the writers of Portal 2. You coming to Valve today? That's the rumor, he wrote. End of message. At 11 a.m., I headed up to the 8th floor where Gabe and a team ran me through the Steam machines. A few minutes into the demo, he was distracted by someone walking in the background. Sorry, my parents just arrived, Gabe told me. Yep, Mr. and Mrs. Newell had trekked over to the office for Gabe's show and tell. I'd never met them before. So first Eric's email, then Gabe's parents show up. All right, something is definitely going on. I soon found out that Valve did have a secret. The team had quietly been working on a new virtual reality headset technology, and I was about to get one of the first demos. Everyone's talking about VR these days, but most of the demos are passive. By that I mean there's not a lot of interactivity besides being able to move your head around a 360-degree environment, sort of like a big panorama photo. Valve has added the game into the mix, thanks to 2 controllers you hold in your hands and positional tracking of the headset, which lets you walk and move in 3D space. It even warns you when you're about to run into a wall in the physical world. All this tracking is accomplished via a little base station called Lighthouse. It uses a spinning red laser light, that's right, a spinning red laser, to track your position. The results are the closest yet to full immersion. You really feel like you're present inside these virtual worlds.
Hello, human. This is an accurate simulation of Gourmet Chef.
One of the demos put me in the middle of a virtual kitchen called Job Simulator from Alchemy Labs in Austin. You're given a recipe and then use your 2 hands to virtually open fridges, crack eggs, slice tomatoes, or if you're me, get distracted by microwaving a mushroom. I was apparently the first person to ever fail this demo because I ran out of time. Damn mushroom. The final demo was a big surprise.
Hello, Repair Associate, and welcome to the Robot Rehabilitation and Wellness Center. Our records indicate that you are the inaugural participant in our Human Diversity Outreach Program. There is a cabinet of drawers in your repair station. Please locate it and open a drawer.
The Portal team had put together a new experience set in Aperture Science. Now, I don't want to spoil too much of what goes on, but I will say that you get to walk around Aperture and help repair a robot. It was so amazing to be in this world. It reminded me of how much I miss Valve making those great story-driven games, but it also proved to me the true potential of virtual reality. Flying back from Seattle, the VR demos kept spinning in my head. and I wanted to learn more. So I asked Gabe if I could sit down with him and Erik Johnson from Valve to chat. What you'll hear now is a raw, unedited, hour-long conversation we had in a back room filled with crates at Valve's GDC booth. From the perils of machining plutonium, to breaking news on where Gabe buys his chocolate chip cookies, to fascinating insight into why Valve is spending so much more time focused on VR over mobile, this was a really great conversation. I hope you enjoy it.
So I'm here at the GDC booth of Valve, hanging out with Gabe and Erik. First of all, congratulations. Seems like a big week for Valve. And, I was up there a couple weeks ago hanging out with you guys, and I knew it was an important day because your mother and father were there with me for a VR demo. The Newells came in. And, I've covered you guys, obviously, for 18 years since when you guys first, started off with Half-Life, and it's been interesting to sort of see the company change. And when I was flying back from Seattle, the thing that occurred to me is it's a new Valve in so many ways, and that what you guys are doing with hardware. I was watching an interview yesterday that Birdwell did with Tested, and I'm like, that's kind of remember from doing animation on Half-Life, and here he is talking about the state of the art in lasers and VR. And the thing, I guess, Gabe, to start with you is, this interesting kind of pivot to hardware. When did that happen? I mean, why did you feel like this was something that Valve wanted to take on?
Well, I think we've always tried to think of what are the, when you go back to the original Half-Life 1, we were all playing first-person action games, and it seemed like at the time, we were like part of the 17, the first time we had any press about Half-Life, we were part of the 17 game first-person shooter roundup. And it seemed like, the people were being kind of disrespectful towards gamers, that the attitude was that you could kind of trivialize what gamers would want in terms of, how many barrels you put on a shotgun. And we were like, well, that is fun, but, that kind of misses the opportunity to think about the broader kinds of experiences that people could have. So we were gamers. We wanted more, of the story and the narrative and having the sense of being part of the world. And that's what we were thinking about, at the beginning of the company. When we started working on Steam, it was kind of the same thing. It's like, aren't there opportunities for us to provide, in that case, services more than experiences, but, can't we be doing more that's really trying to address what customers want? That we thought that there were ways that we could just make the experience of being a PC gamer better by tackling those problems. So in a sense, what we're doing now with hardware really, to us, feels kind of just like an extension of that. It's like, pick the problems that are of greatest significance to our customers in terms of, continuing to improve that overall experience. We'd be happy to just still be focused, more narrowly, just because it's a lot easier to just continue to do the things you've done well. But we just reached a point where we thought, we need to sort of tackle some of these issues on the hardware side if we're going to be able to continue to keep the PC gaming experience moving forward.
Yeah, and when I go up to the office, it's amazing because, you literally have hardware labs now. And fabrications. And you have don't you have a whole fabrication kind of like plant or workshop or facility up there now?
Yeah, we were just talking to one of the guys at Flextronics, and they were like, you guys have the most automated consumer electronics manufacturing in the entire United States, which is, one, it sort of fills your nerd heart with joy to hear something like that. But it also sort of speaks to, what it is that we're trying to do. We sort of want to make hardware more flexible, right? So one of the big reasons we did Steam is that we wanted to improve how often we could give value to our customers. That waiting, several years between deliveries to customers meant that everything was super inflexible. You couldn't realize that there was something better to do, or that you'd made a mistake, and then come up with some solution, because you had one shot, and then it would be you'd have to wait until the next big release of your product before you could do anything about it. And on the hardware side, we're sort of trying to do the same thing. We've got a facility that allows us to change designs, iterate on designs, do very, very small batch runs, and have it behave so that it's more in that iterated cycle that we found to be so important when trying to figure out what the right choices are to make. So yeah, it's pretty cool that somebody at their desk can ship software to any place in the world, and we're trying to make it so anybody sitting at their desk at Valve can ship hardware to anybody in the world.
And maybe even consumers, like the idea of you have the workshop now for software. Could you have a workshop for hardware?
Yeah, that's actually going to be one of the things that I'm working on in the next few months, is plumbing through sort of the workshop ability of what we're doing on the hardware side. We'll start off with things like 3D printing of customized shells and things like that. But the whole goal is to, just try to think about, anytime there's something that's useful for us internally, you try to figure out how you can expose that to your partners, and then also try to figure out how to expose that to customers. So for me, it's you're always looking for things that kind of are a new challenge mentally, like how do all these pieces fit together, how do you assemble it. And so it's for me, I'm sort of giving myself a little bit of a busman's holiday by going off and working on this problem for a while. I've always been kind of a secret hardware nerd. I've got a machine shop in my garage and that sort of thing.
What has Gabe made in his machine shop? Besides knives.
I make knives. I make wine racks.
When I was talking to your dad, I didn't realize it started with your father with the knife thing.
He's a super old school machinist. He worked on. So when you do, anybody who's worked in a machine shop knows that everybody kind of tries to top each other with stories of things they're doing, and so I was sort of complaining to Al about machining titanium. It's like really gummy, and it doesn't transfer heat very well. And it was totally, I'm machining titanium is cool. So, but you can't just say, hey, I'm a badass because I'm machining titanium. You have to kind of complain about it. And then he goes, oh, wow, he's machining titanium. So, of course, he comes back and he says, oh, yeah, titanium, it's a total bear. But it's not like when you're machining plutonium, right? And it catches on fire and it's toxic. And every once in a while you get a blue flash and everybody's dead. It's not shutting down. It's not. It's like, okay.
You're in Black Mesa.
Yeah. You've just won this round, Al. So
we'll see what happens at the machine shop. So Erik, on your side, Dota has taken on a life of its own as a service. I mean, every time I go into that game, even on Steam, it's just you see the amount of content, even in the menus of the shop and the tournaments and everything. It's pretty insane. So how is all this hardware and VR, I mean, you do lots of things at Valve, but how does this all tie into kind of your world and, seeing the evolution of the company going from software to having at least a piece of it on hardware?
I think from the outside, it looks like Valve's building a bunch of hardware, and that's something really new to them in the same way that building a distribution platform was kind of really new and different to us, but we've kind of tried to be really comfortable being uncomfortable and doing new things. And we never have really looked at ourselves as being in one business or another. It's really, we just tried to be in the business of making customers happy and figuring out, whatever it is we need to learn or become comfortable with doing, we'll go ahead and do that. So when Ken built the animation system for Half-Life 1. Yep. It's a bunch of really amazing stuff in its day. And now, like you said, he's working on VR.
spinning. It's so cool because and for all the smart people inside of Valve, I'm sure it's great to have these new problems to tackle.
Yeah,
Because everyone's interested in this stuff, and the fact that you can help solve it, and have like something like Lighthouse seems like that's going to be really cool. That will have a ton of applications.
In the same way that if we look back on any decisions that we've made in our games or software or whatever, if you go back far enough, we always look like we didn't know what we were doing.
Yeah.
And so that's a good thing because it kind of points out that we're learning new stuff and we're getting better at, building cool things that customers will like. So, while you look back at the decisions of, some in Half-Life or early days of Steam, we looked like we were fumbling around a little bit today. But it's actually good because it means that, we're learning new stuff and getting better.
Right. Yeah, let's talk a bit about Steam kind of as a platform. Steam machines are, you guys have announced finally coming out this year after lots of iterations and modifications and testing, sort of like you said, Erik. I remember the first Half-Life, the shipping game was very different than what was shown that first year at E3. I think a lot of people have been wondering about sort of the platform of Steam, where it's going to go, and this whole conversation about kind of open versus closed platforms, and we saw Microsoft here at GDC talking about now anyone can sort of ship a game or ship an app for Xbox One, sort of trying to open that up a bit. You're obviously Steam Machine. You're betting more on Linux sort of as the OS for Steam machines, right, Gabe?
Yeah, I'm actually still stuck on your previous question.
Okay.
So I'm going
Let's
to
go back
to that
Let's
and
go
then I'll
back.
come forward. So there, at Valve, we're pretty comfortable about thinking about things in multiple ways. So there are kind of two other ways to think about what we're doing on the hardware side.
Okay.
One way to think of it is, anytime you're designing something, it's the range of the stack that you can actually change. So a simple way to think of it is, if you're designing the interface to Dota, you can do one thing, but if you're designing the interface to Dota and you're designing a keyboard and mouse at the same time, you're probably going to be able to make better and more interesting choices. So if you also kind of look at the history of Valve, it's to increase sort of the range of places where we can put the right answer. I mean, if you go back all the way to Half-Life 1, the reason that Ken was so successful in what he was doing with Half-Life 1 is that he has a Bachelor of Fine Arts and he's a programmer. So when he's designing the tentacle room, he can say, oh, this is a code problem, or this is an art problem, or this is a level design problem, and he could all do that himself, right? He'd get to this point where he couldn't figure out where to fix the code, so he just okay, I'm just not going to have that hallway coming off of the tentacle area. And that's, sort of the key is to expand the total range up and down, from the application level all the way down to the gate level, just gives you the freedom to solve problems in the most opportune space. Another way to think of it is sort of if you put your financial hat on, which is, when you have a platform, sort of profitability tends to flow to one part of the platform where people are creating the most value. So if you have people building chips and people building software, there's some part of that where the margin's going to end up going. And in the PC industry, I think for probably about a decade, margin was flowing in directions that weren't resulting in core innovation in the PC space. And so we tend to think of it as, okay, we're doing really, really well, which means that we have the financial stability that allows us to forward invest. So if you look at the things that we're doing, we're sort of saying we can make investments that don't pay off for 3 years or 5 years. But if we don't do that, because we're kind of where margin is flowing now in this platform, then it's just not going to happen, right? Yeah. So those are two kind of different ways. Part of the fun and part of the challenge of being at Valve is you kind of have to have these different models that you're thinking about, whether it's a design approach, a financial approach, or the, what it's like every day in the office kind of approach. They're all really valid ways of studying and conceptualizing it. Then to your next question about we're betting on Linux, what we're really betting on is making sure that we don't end up stuck with dependencies that keep us from providing good customer solutions. Yeah. with Apple on the iPhone, we had these issues where we put out a version of our iPhone app, and we're like, 6 hours later, we were like, okay, we're ready to do an update. And we find out 6 months later, they finally actually approved this first update. And, that kind of barrier is really worrisome to us, right?
You guys had that, I remember when you were doing updates for like Orange Box on Xbox and things like that, like the patches would take forever because it's like it has to go through the system.
So, the same thing. It's like we had a group of people at Valve who really were interested in the free to play. And you go and you talk to people who have these more closed platforms, and they say, yeah, we don't think free to play fits in our existing model, so no, you can't do free to play. And that turns out that would have been for us kind of a disaster, because as you can see, we're moving in that direction, which really fundamentally is about how the economics of value creation within a community, and it just happens to have this one pricing characteristic. We think that that's an incredibly important advancement in how games are designed, and that wouldn't have even been possible. Wouldn't have been possible on some of these platforms at all. So that's what really concerns us. Is it's really easy to kind of make it impossible for some of the most important innovations to occur. Obviously I was pretty critical about the directions that Microsoft was going with Windows 8, and that's scary because...
Are they doing better now with 10, do you think?
I really don't have a well-informed answer to that question. Obviously, we're going to, but right now we know Steam runs.
And Phil Spencer, when he was on stage in January, he showed Steam, I guess, running on 10 and all that. So they're trying to at least show that there works.
Yeah. So I definitely hope that that 10, everybody in the PC space is going to benefit, if the resources at Microsoft are working for good and not evil. So, but I really can't say that I've spent enough time thinking about the choices they've made with Windows 10 to have an opinion worth listening to.
Right.
But when you see some of those choices that they were making in Windows 8, it's pretty scary, because it seems to sort of put a straitjacket on all the choices we might make or all our partners might make at a point in time where it seems like, the opportunities are broader than we'd ever have thought possible. We think touch was kept out of the PC for not very good reasons. We think that input innovation on the PC has been way too slow over the last 5 years. We think that VR is sort of naturally a PC thing, and we just want to make sure that that both for ourselves and for the other people who are part of the PC gaming, that the sort of inventiveness and the experimentation that we see as being critical for the long run is possible. So Linux is a great way to ensure that. It's a great kernel. It is a great tool for us. It's a great tool for partners. It was a lot of work, but now that the work is done, it's sort of a one-time fixed cost. So we definitely see, all of the investment that we've made and our partners have made, it's going to start paying off now in terms of, shipping products, and in terms of giving us, a great hedge against, bad decision-making elsewhere in the PC side.
Now, speaking of decision-making, you guys made, I think a smart decision to push into VR. I think people were surprised, what you guys brought to GDC, that you have a, headset partnership with HTC, shipping this year, some amazing content, some great innovations like Lighthouse. And I think for a while people, knew Valve obviously was, leading a lot of innovation in VR. And then there was a time where, you guys were, I think I remember even when the Kickstarter started for Oculus, you were like, Palmer is going to go solve this stuff. It's great. And then, I know some of your guys went to Oculus. People were wondering, like, was Valve going to sort of really step into the VR game? And it sounds like here at GDC you're saying, like, no, it's like we're leading the charge. Was that a decision that sort of had changed or morphed over time about, you thought others were going to do VR and then you guys found sort of, some problems that they weren't solving, like input or something that you wanted to help with, or what's been the sort of the evolution of the thinking on how deep you have to go into VR?
So VR is interesting. It's one of those things which is it appears to have great long-term potential, but it also really struggles from being terrible right now, right? So my first VR demo was in a Silicon Graphics tractor trailer, I think in like 1987. And, when you put on sort of your consumer hat, it's like, oh my God, this is terrible. And I hate everybody who made me feel so incredibly nauseous, right? It was like the most aversive way of being introduced to VR imaginable. Nowadays, there are lots of problems that have been solved. Not, the vertigo thing is one of many. It's like panel problems have been solved, understanding the visual processing, how the brain works and how the eye works, having, low persistence panels, understanding jutter. There's a whole bunch of things that you have to understand to get to the point where we're at right now. And then what's sort of missing still, we have sort of glimmers of what the incredibly compelling content might be, but we still don't have, the GL Quake that justified everybody going off and buying 3D cards. And that's one of those things where you just sort of have to have faith that if you build a bunch of tools, maybe somebody at Valve will have some cool ideas that, trigger, a lot of activity by other content developers. Maybe it'll be somebody at some point is going to start to point the way for the rest of us. And, we're just saying, let's try to be inventive, but let's not assume, unfortunately, you can't put any of that on a schedule. It'll come when it comes. But we certainly have good enough hardware now,
right,
so that you're not spending all your time saying this might be the best piece of software I've ever used, but I can't tell because the hardware isn't giving me what I need to sort of test that. Input. It's like, okay, now we've got input that's good enough that you're not constantly hating on the input rather than seeing the promise of something that people are building. So, to me, it feels like we're now entering the stage where somebody somewhere, whether, it's at a big content developer or one guy working in his home in Malaysia, is going to put something out and everybody says that really makes me realize how we can capitalize on it. The demos that we're showing here, hopefully they're thought-provoking, right? I'm going to go get a couple of VR demos after we're done talking here. Yeah. And, like for me right now, there's this problem in my head. I don't understand the little people problem. And it's this weird thing in VR where little tiny people are really cool looking. And it sounds like kind of an absurd thing, but what it means is that my conceptual model of why VR works has no explanation for why things at this certain scale level seem so much more compelling than other things. It's like I know empirically that this is true, right, but I don't have any model in my design sense as to why that would be. So I can go talk to some people about that to see.
This is that one demo you have of all the little people, sort of that strategy map. That's what you're talking about? Those really grab you? Yeah.
And so, like when you design games, you have to sort of monitor your own reactions to stuff pretty closely. And I know that I'm having a reaction, and it's not an idiosyncratic reaction. Other people have the same reaction, but we don't have any model that explains that, right? It's something that's absolutely occurring, but nobody can really understand, like, well, should we make them bigger? Should we make them smaller? Or is it like tinier and tinier?
There's one though. PlayStation has one a demo called London Heist, and there's this guy that looks you in the eye, and it's motion capture. And there's this moment where he sort of looks at you, and then you sort of look at him back in the eye, and it connected with me. And it was sort of he actually scale. It's interesting. They told me that he sort of scales based on how tall you are and things like that, so he matches your eye level and stuff, and it's kind of interesting. But have you had experiences where bigger people don't make sense to you, or it's just the little people seem more compelling?
Well, it's just one of those things where, lots of things you're just used to, right? I mean, we've been making games for a long time, and so lots of things that occur when you're, you can sort of have like, you can you can usually go in, play a game for like 5 minutes, and you understand all of the choices and consequences of those choices.
Yeah.
So when you run into something where you don't understand it, it's actually kind of exciting because it may turn out to be nothing more than novelty, right? I don't think it is. I think there's something that we don't understand yet, but it's exciting that we get to go and figure out what that might be, because then it might point to other things that help us understand. There's the presence thing in VR, right? And we're still trying to understand why we've sort of reached the point where that sense of presence in the space is so compelling. Like, how can we make you feel more present? What might we accidentally do that would make you feel less present? And then how do you turn that into something that's entertaining? Like how do you take advantage of that? And so the little people thing is another attribute that appears to be fairly unique to VR, that it may turn out to not really actually matter a whole lot, or it may illuminate something about how people's brains work in the space that helps us build whole classes of games. For me, you can look at those sort of milestone games on just about every platform where everybody sort of says, oh, I get the Mario platform game, or, oh, I played Doom, now I understand, the 400 other first-person shooters that are going to come out of that. And so we're right now, as a sort of a bunch of people in the industry, are looking at VR saying, where are the sort of through lines that we can really capitalize? We may look back and say, do you remember, that first demo we did, and people will just like, oh my God, that was like the anti-game, right? It was like we had completely managed to miss all of the interesting opportunities and find, the one terrible, utterly uninteresting thing to do in VR. It's like the number of, it's like early on with PCs, everybody always would say, and then you'll keep your kitchen recipes on your PC, right? It was like this, like, people sort of got a little bit of tunnel vision on that, and it was the stupidest idea ever, right? I have never in my life said I'll keep my recipes on my PC.
Where do you keep your chocolate chip cookie recipe?
I keep my chocolate chip cookies at Amazon, and they're only 4 hours away. So anyhow, that's where I think we are. We're just at this opportunity to discover the potential, and we hope that we're building, enough fragments and enough pieces and enough tools to really enable that.
Yeah, no, I feel like that's something that, even when I'm playing a lot of these demos, they're really compelling, but, like even movement, right? Like we're used to in first-person shooters moving a certain way, and like here, it's like even the Portal demo, or the Aperture Science demo, it's interesting because, there's that moment where like you want to walk out there and you can't really, and that there's a wall somewhere out there and you can't do it. So it's like, what's movement, right? So you have input now, but now it's sort of like, how do you move in spaces? So Erik, for you, were you a big believer in VR? I mean, I heard Gabe talk about the little people, like I think of, Dota, like how could it tie to something like that? I mean, were you a skeptic initially, or did you always feel that there was something here?
It was clear early on that there's something here. And like Gabe was saying, now we're at a state where we have all of these tools and all these, there's a million different directions you could go, and it's a good point in time for VR to kind of get that in front of a bunch of developers and have them figure out, in some ways it's kind of like the early mod scenes that existed around Quake, where you're going to see every different direction explored. Some of them won't be that great. Some of them are going to be amazing. So I don't, not really a skeptic. It's just a question of how long will it take until the right experience is going to happen. We think that it's kind of been proven over and over again that the right approach to get interesting invention to happen is just to make it low friction for developers to be able to experiment and distribute that to customers and get feedback on it. So that's kind of the next step now that we have the basic building blocks of how you can approach building content on VR. I'm sure that all of those are also, we want to form feedback loops as much as possible. So we need to stay on top of the things that developers build, get feedback from customers, tools that they need on top of that, ways we need to improve different parts of the system. So that's the fun part. We're past the not so fun part of how do you put a bunch of robots into a place to manufacture things, and I don't know, that's kind of fun actually, but
I can't wait to see that place. So when you look at the internal teams as they were, like, you did that cool Aperture demo, things like that. I mean, the developers at Valve and obviously third parties and stuff are starting to have fun with VR. Is that something? I mean, from the software challenges of that. I mean, does that get people excited internally, the teams, about sort of what can we do with this?
Oh yeah, people. I mean, there's a huge amount of excitement at Valve around building content for VR. We are always looking for like a new medium or a new way to create entertainment. Internally at Valve, there's kind of multiple markets running all the time of on what eventually ends up with deciding what the things are that we do.
Right.
The currency for that is people's time.
Yep.
And it's really easy. Like I mean, you know this, Geoff, but like we don't sit around and review products monthly and then make decisions on whether things should go forward or not.
Well, there's just momentum, I feel like, that just sort of starts to happen. Right?
I mean, it's literally how many desks are in a room working on a project is the indicator, because a bunch of people have decided, hey, this is the thing that I'm willing to invest my time in pushing forward. And VR and Steam machines and all of those things, they have a huge amount of momentum inside of the company, which, I don't know, for me, and I think for Gabe, is like that's a really great way to know if things are going well or not, because we're pretty confident that if a bunch of people from Valve are willing to invest their time in it, it's probably a good proxy for what customers want us to do. Yep. So.
Absolutely. Well, and you look now at, obviously Source 2 you guys announced coming out for free. People are going to be able to, use that. The Aperture demo is built on Source 2, so that's something I know for a long time you guys have been working behind the scenes on to sort of get that ready for development in games. I know, it sounds like it's going to roll out or sort of inside of Dota 2 at some point. For people that have heard, the Source 2 free, can you talk a bit about sort of like what is Source going to enable Valve, but also the community to sort of start to do in games that they haven't been able to do before?
Started for us is we needed to figure out ways to just be more efficient.
Yep.
We're always looking for what are the sets of tools that we need to give to developers so that they're spending less time fighting those tools and more time building content for customers.
Yeah.
For ourselves, and I think this is true for Epic and Unity and everyone else, it's clear that you need to think deeply about how it is your users can also create content within your technology, and that's something that has kind of existed in past sets of technology, but something that we had to take really seriously with Source 2.
Yeah.
Which makes it also a really easy decision to just give that away for free to everybody, because it's well suited for that. Dota 2 will be kind of our first testing grounds. We need to ship it first and have lots of users using it, because there's kind of no substitute for that for technology. And then we'll roll out custom games in Dota 2.
Okay.
People will go nuts and make a bunch of cool things there, and then I would assume not too far after that, then we can just put it in the hands of whoever wants to use it.
Right. When you look at, Gabe, you mentioned the, free-to-play sort of being, kind of, the future, or sort of, I don't mean to paraphrase that, but it sort of felt like you thought, that obviously seems where games are going. I remember when we did the final hours of Portal many years ago, and, you gave that quote about like, well, we're sort of thinking now every game's going to have some kind of, community thing, and it's like, single-player only games are sort of not where things are going. I think a lot of people wonder, Valve as a software creator, sort of what kind of experiences do the teams want to build, and not like this franchise, that franchise, but sort of like, when Valve ships another game product, what do you think that looks like? I mean, as Dota obviously has become a service, but when you think of like the next iteration of Valve expressing itself artistically like that, what is that? Do you even start to think about like what that looks like in terms of the business model, or what it is?
I think that you can look at Source 2 gives us a bunch of opportunities of things to take advantage of. VR does. Every game we've shipped, we've learned a lot. Yeah. So, I think it's kind of straightforward for gamers to extrapolate, from what we've done in the past to what we're likely to do in the future. For us, everything is building on what we've learned from previous projects.
Right.
So,
but it sounds like something like free to play. Like, is it the idea of a $60 box product? I mean, the industry is changing, and it's like Valve has sort of changed with it. I think some people always say like, "Oh, I want Valve to go back and do this," which is the way I remember them sort of creating content and distributing content. But it sounds like you can still, to me at least, you could take some of those franchises, some of those characters, some of those worlds, and express them in different ways, which could be really unique and compelling.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think obviously people want to see, if somebody likes Team Fortress, they'd like to see what we can do with Team Fortress or Left 4 Dead or Half-Life or everything. And so what we're trying to do is come up with ways so that we're both, we love all those games. We love all those characters and universes and storylines. And it's, we have no shortage of opportunities. So we try to be a little bit strategic and sort of like, okay, this is the piece of the puzzle that we can solve with this set of technologies that we've developed, and this is the new piece of technology that we think is going to be generally useful, and so this ties up well with this property.
Yeah.
It's like, if you think of it as each one of our franchises represents a tool, and so you just want to pick up the right tool at the right time. So like Dota 2 is incredibly character rich.
Yep.
I mean, there are how many? 110 characters.
Yeah.
So if you have a problem that involves wanting to work on the aspect of having lots and lots of those strongly realized characteristics, then Dota is the right place to do it. Team Fortress represents a tool. So that's when we're thinking of what are the next challenges, then we tend to pick the franchises that are sort of most useful in going forward. And if we don't have one, then obviously we have to create a new one. But I get it. I mean, I'm a fan of TV shows. I'm a fan of writers. I'm a fan of movies. I'm a fan of games, and I certainly understand why people are like, hey, I remember this awesome experience, and I'm starting to get worried that I'm never going to get to have it again. It's like, I'm a fan of Terry Pratchett, and he's, has Alzheimer's, and it's like, oh my God, I may never get another great, Discworld novel. Yeah. So we understand it, and we feel that, and we think at the end of the day, customers are going to be really happy with where we spent our time and how we've turned that into entertainment for them. But we are also going to, build on what we've learned, right? And we've learned a lot. We're not going to go all retro because, there are too many interesting things that have been learned. The only reason we'd go back and do like a super classic kind of product is if a whole bunch of people just internally at Valve said, they wanted to do it, and and had a reasonable explanation for why it was. But, if you want to do another Half-Life game and you want to ignore everything we've learned, in shipping, Portal 2 and in shipping, all the updates on the multiplayer side, that seems like a bad choice. So we'll keep moving forward, but that doesn't necessarily always mean what people are worried that it might mean.
Right. Well, and even I think the VR, the Aperture demo, I think it was like fun to see like the dialogue in there and GLaDOS, and that was in a different experience. But I think that's like when you experience that, fans are like, oh, that's incredible. So you could ship a cool little, bunch of VR experiences. Or do you ever think of, you talked about, obviously you have the workshop now for people creating, items in games, potentially going to have a physical workshop or whatever. I mean, do you ever think of allowing the customers to be a part of sort of playing with the franchises in sort of a deeper way, or some of these that you're not touching on, Erik? I mean, obviously Dota, you've seen that, but I mean, do you think of like, hey, we let people make hats, but do we let people make games or sort of partner with them? Or I always think like, like voiceovers you guys are so great at, but it's like, is there a way for Valve to say like, hey, we'll help like, do some dialogue and voices, or you can, you can hire the voice actors through us, through some, voice workshop or something like that. I mean, are those the types of things you guys ever think about?
Those sound like conversations we have all the time.
Yeah.
I mean, probably the most important lesson we've learned, I guess, that's really hardened for us in the last 5 years is that our customers in aggregate are better at everything than us, and they're smarter than us. Right. And every time that we've kind of opened up a way for them to feel more ownership and affinity towards the products that they care about, they tend to produce a bunch of really cool stuff. More recently, the professional gaming scene around Dota 2 is an example of that, where those are a set of users that, I mean, Gabe and I definitely can't play Dota 2 like them. So they have unique value that is, creating, just a tremendous amount of entertainment for everyone in the community. That's a form of user-generated content. So, we think we need to. It's hard work to kind of think through the issues involved with how do you create the sets of tools so that users kind of as a whole can create an arbitrary thing within a game.
How do you let them sort of self-organize?
And in the guys from Epic, what they're doing with Unreal Tournament, it's along the same path. I mean, they're building that game out in the open with everyone else. You can go onto GitHub, download the source code for Unreal Tournament. You can get it shipped in the game to everyone else. We think that stuff's. We think it's really smart, and kind of the direction that a lot of things are headed on the PC. Yeah. There's a lot of really talented users out there, and at the point where the user base really gels around specific things and they all kind of go in one direction at once, it's incredibly powerful. So we're always looking for cool ways to do that.
So when you guys think of, obviously this is a big milestone for you with, VR, with Steam machines. I mean, how far out do you see where Valve is going right now? I mean, I know it's sort of, a lot of it's based on the momentum. This project starts, this stops. But I mean, is there a sense now that you have VR, now that you have Source 2, it's sort of now that can, trigger these three things that we're going to spend the next, 18 months or 2 years focused on?
So you're always, I mean, it's kind of try to look into the future, and then you try to have like an uncertainty function around that. So like here's an example of conversation that we actually have. So you're working on the VR stuff, and you say, how long is VR going to be stable, right? Because you look at phones, and internally we have this argument that the current smartphone is actually a fairly short-term platform, like compared to like the keyboard and mouse desktop PC, it's not going to be nearly as robust, and that will transition fairly quickly to what we think VR is going to turn into. That this weird idea of having this little tiny screen at arm's length was really cool. It really was an accident of battery technology and an input methodology, but that'll probably skip ahead. So then we look at VR and we say, how long will VR last? And so we look at all the research that is going on right now in terms of how you can directly stimulate people's optic nerves, right? That there's some really great research that's being done around figuring out how to encode signals directly into your brain. And there's all this really clever stuff going into essentially how can you, I'll sort of jump ahead. It's reasonable to expect at some point that your neurons essentially have the equivalent of a MAC address, and that you're just talking into people's brains using, some 60 gigahertz spectrum. So you're driving people's brains directly without surgery.
That's next GDC.
Yeah. But you look at that and you say, okay, if that actually happens, which parts of this are a waste of time, right? So spending a lot of time building really elaborate touch gestural systems, probably a waste of time. Yeah. Having good solutions for navigating virtual 3D environments with a high degree of presence, probably a lot of that is going to map directly over to this world. It's like
Right.
A head-mounted display without a head-mounted display
Yes.
probably still looks a lot like VR. So a killer app in head-mounted display land is probably still a killer app when you are...
Right, instead of your controller, it's your hand or whatever, your brain. Yeah.
And so you look at that and you just kind of want to test to make sure that you're not investing in something that's sort of fragile. But at the same time, you have to go all the way back and you have to look at the person whose desk is next to you and say, is that person happy? Is that person having fun today?
Yeah.
Is that person being productive today? So you have to manage these time spans simultaneously. And every once in a while, it's, I was about to go into financial planning land, but I won't. It's like, it's like you're looking at the yield curve. And every once in a while, something really long term will cause you to, it'll propagate all the way back into the present in terms of choice that you're making. But a lot of times it's just this kind of tail whipping out around all of these issues that you're trying to keep in your head at the same time. Every once in a while we'll see something that we thought would occur 5 years into the future. We thought 5 years ago something would be true, and that it is, and we all high-five each other. And then fairly often something will just come completely out of the blue that we don't anticipate at all, that we need to react to in the next 3 months. So sometimes you have a really good idea of what's coming, and sometimes you're completely wrong. Along those same lines, a lot of what we're doing with Source 2 specifically is to make it possible so that the production of an experience is very much in collaboration with the community, and that all of the it's plumbed through economically, it's plumbed through in terms of identity. It's, so I can be anywhere, I can work at Valve, or I can work, back to that kid in Malaysia. But we're both creating this entertainment experience, and it's filtered appropriately, and it's selected for me. It's optimal for me. I'm this other kid in Brazil, and I'm finding the stuff in this shared created universe. And that's actually that's really why we're doing what we're doing with Source 2, is to make it possible for thousands of people or millions of people to be all generating this shared entertaining universe. And you can look at the properties that we have and probably say, oh, I would see how having a whole bunch of people extending and annotating and storytelling in this particular universe would make sense. But that's, now that we got Source 2 out, now you'll start to see us start to lay out some of the pieces so that we have this really large shared collaborative entertainment space that allows people to be as productive as they want to be in terms of building entertainment value for other people. That's a choice. That's something that we started 4 years ago. 4 years ago. It was like we had these ideas about how you built these large sort of endless entertainment experiences. And one of the dependencies was getting a bunch of economy stuff working. There's a bunch of tools work to do. Those are sort of baked now, and now we're going to start capitalizing, with how that actually translates into entertainment experiences for people.
And so obviously there's all these things that are happening. There's all this talk about, what does this look like? How does it manifest itself? Erik, as you guys think of it, Dota is a great example. It's like it's a game as a service. It sort of continues to grow and expand. Custom games. When you look at the roadmap, even for something like Dota, how far out do you guys plan that out? Or, how much is driven by the community now?
I think the kind of mental model of a fan is like a really good way, encapsulates the way we think about those issues across the whole company, where it's not uncommon that we're going to do something, that say longer term or kind of risky. And the way that we kind of break down what direction that we go in is usually we're talking through, okay, well, let's work through all the ways that we suspect that this might be incorrect, and where we end up at the end of that incorrect assumption, is that a good thing or a bad thing? Because it's the common path that we take. We think being able to predict what's going to happen or what customers are going to want in the future is really valuable, but it's also really difficult and almost impossible to just be absolutely correct on. So we spent a lot more time thinking of directions that we kind of wanted to move into. So with Dota 2, one of the directions has always been, how do we get users more involved? And how can users create value over time in the economy, and value for other users in a variety of ways. So we don't think, in terms of the work that we do day in and day out, we're not thinking incredibly long term, but there's kind of a shared, there's a lot of shared kind of higher level ideas that we're across the entire company that we're always thinking about.
I'm sure even that momentum model internally, I think, almost extends to the fans, because you see what they sort of get excited about.
Yeah,
and
I mean,
where,
fans know what we're doing. We are.
Fans can drive you in one direction, maybe.
Well, yeah, absolutely, and they the
petitions aren't always successful.
But it's not uncommon that I find out, things that are going on at Valve from hearing it from our fans, and that's fine. I mean, they're very accurate.
They pay a lot of attention.
They pay a lot of attention, and they're super smart, and they give us so much good data that we're on the right track as we're kind of progressing towards the end point on some.
But, sometimes, as you said, Gabe, I mean, you have to sort of think, like where we think things are going to be in 5 years. Sometimes, you always wonder, like with fans, do you sort of, and Steve Jobs would always say, it's like they don't know where you're going to go. You have to see the vision, sort of guide them there sometimes, because it's like, they can't necessarily predict what they want, but you may have to sort of, because of,
Yeah, we don't think of ourselves as being that kind of smart. There's the rare, so you'll run into a case where there's something we think is really important. I mean, this is a little abstract, but something we think is really important,
right,
and we want to push in the direction. The reason why fans haven't arrived at the same conclusion is because they don't have the same data as us.
Yeah.
But our reaction isn't to just keep going.
Yeah.
Our reaction is like, well, let's give them the data.
Let's bring them into the clubhouse and sort of share this stuff with them. And sort of,
what do you guys think about it? It's just it's a development
and then start
tool.
iterating based on that.
It has two properties that are really valuable to us. It's a really useful development tool. Mm-hmm. It helps keep us using our time efficiently, and it's also super entertaining. Our fans like being part of that. They own it, right?
We've talked a lot about sort of where Valve's gone, where you're going. I think this is kind of a really, it's an exciting time, I think, for the company to see sort of all this stuff come to fruition, and hopefully everyone's on a high because the stuff is here. It's getting a great reaction. Has there recently been tough decisions that you've had to make, though, Gabe, and you look back over the past couple of years? Like, what are some of the tougher things that people may not realize that sort of, like at some point you do have to guide the company in one direction or another? When you look back, are there things that you've had to sort of course correct or help the company get towards?
Well, we had to sit down. We thought, so Ken was working on a project called Stars of Blood. Like a lot of people at Valve, you can sort of get into this mindset that you will kill and destroy anything that gets into your way. And sometimes, that makes it a little bit hard to, people are used to overcoming obstacles. And so, Ken's working on Stars of Blood, and we're like, well, I am saying to Ken, it's like, this isn't sort of coming together. I'm not sure I understand, where you're going with this. And, Ken's like, no, this is awesome. And yet, and eventually like, no, I really, it's like, we're staging an intervention, Ken. You've decided you're going to do an impossible thing, and he's like, okay, I guess I am. I'll just go do VR now. It's easier. But that's about as bad as it's gotten over the last couple of years. It's actually a huge amount of fun to be doing what we're doing. It's a huge amount of fun to be connected to our fan base. It's always great anytime you've worked on stuff for a while and you get to take it out in public and see how people are, see what they react well to and what they, don't react. Just getting that feedback is great. So I can't really say that it's been particularly tough for us at all lately. If anything, it's, the last, 3 or 4 years have probably been some of the most fun 3 or 4 years we've had as a company. So hopefully that shows up to our customers as well. Hopefully they're going, yeah, I'm still, hopefully they're still fans of what we're doing, and they'll get excited with what we're going to be rolling out over the next year or two.
This is the GameSlice podcast.
Well, shortly after this interview was taped, we heard the sad news that acclaimed author Terry Pratchett, who Gabe mentioned in the interview, had passed away. Not to end things on a down note, but I do want to thank Gabe, Erik, and Doug Lombardi from Valve for being a part of this experiment. And if you like the conversation, drop me a line on Twitter and let me know. I'm hoping to do more episodes like this with more people from Valve and from other companies, and the amount of time and energy I put into making these will largely depend on the reaction from the community. So you can subscribe and donate to this podcast at podcast.gameslice.com, which is a very temporary website for now. Thanks to my buddy RAC for the intro and outro music, and DJ Dane for letting me use his Half-Life Long Train Ride Home remix. This has been Geoff Keighley. Thanks for listening. We'll talk to you next time.